All right, welcome. What was that for?
It's because you say ready,
That's
3,
so
2,
rude.
and Elvis barks.
Yes, he's well trained. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans, it's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. So without further ado, let's talk about why we're here today. So we've done one already, and we had so much fun with that fireside chat, we decided to do another one. So while I mute myself to let the dog out, do you want to tell them about our fireside chats?
So this is kind of an effort to keep the show fresh from stagnating. We're bringing more discussion panels, book reviews, movies, things that don't fit into our typical panel format or of a podcast is quite as well. It's a little bit more low key, as you'll probably know. I hope you'll know. But we have Terry Mixon back, who was so popular the first time. We're trying him out the second time, and who knows, maybe we'll keep him around even longer this time.
Don't worry, I'll be worse this time, I promise.
So if you think of any random, unpredictable things you want to see done or topics you want to hear us talk about, let us know through our Facebook group, email, which is podcasts, Blasters and Blades podcast at gmail.com. I promise I did sleep last night, but I have had some wine. And we'll let you know as we dive into different topics, what's going on. If you think there's somebody you want to see, let us know. So is JR back, or should I keep talking?
You should keep talking and introduce who else is here.
Okay. Well, Terry's eager. So, but we're going to first talk about what the topic is for the day. Bayonet Books has an anthology coming out, as well as so many other anthologies. Bane just did the Freehold anthology, as well as there's the a new noir fatality from noir anthology. So we're kind of fascinated. I'm fascinated by short content and what's going on with it, whether it be novellas, short stories, novelettes, which JR can explain the difference between them, or anything else that we have going on. So let's bring on our guests, and they can tell us what they're here for. Terry Mixon, since you're so eager, can you introduce
I'm not sure why I'm here. I'm a novelist. What do I know about short stories?
Oh, you know a thing or two. You've done it.
I've read a few of yours.
Your short stories, dude. So this is Terry Mixon, who's not going to tell us anything about himself other than he says he's.
I'm Terry Mixon, author of Empire of Bones and Imperial Marine Saga, and I'm a space opera military science fiction guy, and that's it. That's me.
And then we have the lovely.
And he worked for NASA. That's his. Hold on. He worked for NASA as part of the department that faked the moon landing. So those are his credentials to write sci-fi.
Oh, so
I only worked for NASA for 16 years. It was only just barely a blip in the radar.
And then,
yeah, but I mean, you helped fund the conspiracy, so that counts.
Oh, I'm too broke to fund any conspiracy.
Buy his books, so he's less broke, and we can see what other conspiracies he comes up with.
Well, I mean, if NASA could hire Stanley Kubrick to film the moon landings, I mean, that's a pretty fat budget right there. I mean, that's where it's all going.
Jamie looks a little worried.
That's true.
Oh no, I'm so used to this.
So, Jamie, will you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Jamie DiNote. I am a two-time contributor to the Freehold universe via Resistance with my husband here. And I have my solo debut story in Defiance, which I think is currently throwing some people for a loop.
Yeah, it's a little dark. We've heard, how many times have you heard that now?
Yeah, that seems to be the primary adjective.
And Christopher DiNote.
Hey, Chris DiNote. Pretty new at this too. First time we got published was, like Jamie said, together in Freehold Resistance. Last year I did my first solo debut short in an antho called Space Force Building the Legacy, which came out right around the time just before The Real Thing got announced. And second or third rather short work came out with Doc Wolrab in Defiance, and that I guess fits more of the novelette description. We'll hear the expert opinion of JR here to confirm or deny that. But got a few more things in the bag right now. 2 pieces that I'm just waiting on editorial comments from Cedar Sanderson from one of hers. So next year or two, ought to get some more stuff out finally.
Yep, and I've seen some of the proposals that were signed contract-wise for him for longer content. So basically, when I told Jamie she was showing up because I'm nice like that, she's like, "Oh well, if I have to be here, he does too." Because misery loves company, right, Terry?
We are a package deal. Got both of us in the same house anyway.
Yes, Sean. Now hush. I mean, it does make it convenient. The commute is killer sometimes.
Right?
Oh yeah,
So. Yeah, I mean, I don't want you to tax yourself. At the end of the episode, we'll have in the show notes all of their social media. Yeah, I believe it. We'll have all of the social media links so you can follow all of them, stalk them as you do. So let's start with the elephant in the room. Why do you think short stories sort of fell out of fashion with the novelettes, novellas, and short content as defined by, I think the Hugo's the one that set the standard of word counts for everything, right, Terry? You were around in the beginning.
Oh, sure. That's how old I am. I was there in the very beginning. It depends on who you ask what the definitions of what short stories, novelettes, novellas, everything is. SIFWA has a different definition than what the Hugos do. And I kind of think it's just, a gut check on what's a short story and what's not. As far as why they're not as popular as they are, I'm not sure that's even a true statement. It may be that there are fewer anthology magazines that are publishing short stories, but I don't know that I would say that they're less popular. It may be just a financial decision that anthologies aren't making them enough money.
Fair enough. That was Cisca's pushback when we prepped these show notes.
Yes.
So do you want to weigh in on that, Jamie or Chris? Do you guys feel like they're not as popular or just not as lucrative?
I think it's more, I don't know. I kind of think academia ruined it for it in a lot of ways, because I think the more short stories and short content got taken on by, slice of life is that, is the thing. And, you need to be real literature. I kind of think that killed it because I used to work in a library. So everything that I saw for short stories was pulps, weird fiction, early 20th century stuff, late 19th century stuff. And it just seemed like after World War II, maybe it just seems like it just sort of started to die. And then by the 70s, boom, it's gone. That's just the impression I got. And I don't know if it's just because taste changed or because English professors ruined it for everybody. I've been trying to figure it out.
I like blaming the English professors. I mean, I know Chuck will probably get an umbrage with me, but I blame the English professors. I think that's a good one.
I think it could possibly be like a self-flicking ice cream cone. Writers want to break out. They want their debut story. They want their breakout hit. And so they see what's popular. They see who the bestsellers are, and it's all these doorstopper novels. So they think, gotta write that. I can't get rich making short stories. I have to do this. So therefore the short stories aren't written as often or aren't published as often because both sides are chasing the money. Maybe.
I think there's a couple of things about it that are really interesting. One is, so Writers of the Future is all anthology. And it is, if we can do another episode talking about why it's great and everything else, but they do an anthology every year and they have really good content, consistently good content and good authors. And they're all breakout authors. That's part of, for those quick synopsis of it, it's a writing competition for those people who have not made significant money. And it's like less than two pieces of published work that have made a profit. And they actually specified the dollar amount. I'm not even going to pretend what it is, but so basic, and it is one where they come out, that it's a writing competition that they do every quarter, and all the winners go and get put in an anthology. but it's consistently making enough money that they continue to do it. It was put on originally by L. Ron Hubbard. I think that's right.
Yeah, Brad Torgerson talks about this a lot.
Yeah, it's really been fascinating because like I was at Dragon Con one year and this guy literally, he turned around, he submitted the same short story, no changes, no editing, except for to the headline, I won a Writers of the Futures competition, and he got a check back instead of a rejection letter because the people know that that's a good short story anthology. So there's a certain level of credibility with some of these. And I think where anthologies can really struggle is sometimes they're not as consistently good. But I think readers have really gravitated towards anthologies. I've seen a lot of them coming out. Chris Kennedy Publishing puts out they put out a book every week, but they've probably put out at least 6 anthologies in the last year. Bane's doing more and more anthologies. And I was talking with Gail Martin about some of it. And I think some of it is where they may not be making lots of money, but for the readers, they're cracking and they're really enjoying it. It's a great way and an inexpensive way to sample a bunch of different authors. It's a great way to, they have to figure out, so my brain's going like 6 miles an hour, but it's a great way to find out a bunch of authors. But the other thing is we have short attention span theater everywhere these days. And not everybody wants to binge read a 13+ series. I'm sorry, Terry, I love the series, but it is long and gorgeous. And it is opera, space opera. So operas are supposed to be long and gorgeous. But not everybody, some people get really intimidated by that. So they want to try it, but they don't want to put in a time suck commitment if it's someone that they don't think they'll like. But also with the pandemic, it was nice to be able to just sit down, quickly read a story, then go about the rest of my day because I had a beginning, middle, and end all within a couple hours of reading. So I think the problem that they have is marketing, is how do you market an anthology? Because thanks to Amazon's little niche of all these subcategories, it makes marketing those things very easy. But when you have an anthology, not everybody in there is a Dresden File book. Not everybody's in it. So you have more variety show. It's like a variety show. And how do you market a variety show?
Well, it's like a really great series of anthos that I saw was the Planetary series by Tuscany Bay. That's reprint. These are great. It's just, I think it suffers from that marketing thing. And, it's kind of weird because I was wondering, does this like mirror what happened in music? In the 60s on, you had the albums, the long form, right? The albums are the novels of music, right? As opposed to singles. And then you get back into the present day. It's all about singles again. And I remember, being a kid going to Hot Topic. Yeah, I'm going to date myself here a little bit. And you get those punk rock compilations. All these indie record labels. All these indie records. Yeah, they got like 13, 14, 20 bands on them you never heard of. And if you like a couple of them, hey, you're not out anything, first of all. Yeah. And 2, if you like 3 or 4, you pick up the record. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also like LibertyCon, which we've talked about. LibertyCon has an anthology that is put out through Bain, available everywhere, called Give Me Liberty, and you have some big names in it. It has sold a bunch of copies, and they will continue to have that as a running thing because it's everything goes to support the LibertyCon charity. So I mean, there's also sometimes where maybe. Like for her, that was easy marketing for Liberty because they have a huge following of people as well as their authors. So it's really hard to say.
As a writer, one of the reasons that I do write short stories for anthologies is it gets me and my work in a short form in front of a different audience than I have already.
So I know Jody, who couldn't make it today because she is having a blast, but she had prior commitments. She has told me before because she wrote for the Black Tide Rising anthology, which was a very different story than what she normally writes. Because she said it gave her a chance to stretch her legs and try something different. So I think JR was going to try and say something.
I think to a point that the a lot of the magazines that were a lot of the short content was published and people could subscribe to them and submit them back when people used to go door to door and sell you things like magazine subscriptions. And as the trad pubs constantly consolidated with each other, so there were less and less companies out there. You add that to the digital revolution, which a lot of existing marketing sort of at first they dismissed. Oh, that'll never take on. It'll be like the cassette tape. Nobody will ever do it. And then as that sort of happened and they missed the boat, they just the business model, they lost it. And I think that's a large portion of it. I think as that happened, though, you have that generation that was conditioned to try out new stories with short content, aged to the point where there wasn't anything to pass on. And that gap is what's hurting, I think, the sales on short content. There's a reason that I do the Bayonet Books anthologies is because I'll write a short story because it just calls to me and I write it so I can get it out of my head. Well, it's easier to sell it as a collection of other short stories than it is to sell it by itself for 99 cents when $5 can get you a 100,000 word novel versus 99 cents get you 10. And so that value proposition makes the anthologies a sort of marketable way to do that. But I put it on the consolidation of the trad pub sort of shrinking the professional market, maybe artificially so if the readers are still there, but now you're at the point where you've got to find those readers again.
That's a really good point.
We're starting to see I think you're starting to see some of those come back with the e-zines. They're publishing them as e-magazines now. I don't know. I know. I think was it Galactic Outlaws is one that's out there regularly. I know some of the
there's
RPG producing companies.
Yeah, there's the Galaxy's Edge by Mike
Lafferty. Yes. And then I know like some of the RPGs are starting to put out their own e-zines where it'll have a short story set in the generic field because there is overlap between people that play games and people that read. And so they're starting to do like sort of a hybrid where it's a short story, then something inspired by that short story of game content, and then, go from there to sort of bridge the gap. But it'll be interesting to see because now if you're doing it as a magazine, you're not artificially limited by page length and page counts. So does that kill the short story now that you've got room to be long and verbose? I don't know. But anybody else have anything to weigh in before we move on to the next question?
Just this is that there was also the rebranding of a lot of those magazines that collapsed and died, and somebody else buys the rights and it comes back. Mm-hmm. And I think part of what hurt them was Weird Tales 1980 is not Weird Tales 1940, or 2010 is not. It might have these old names like Astonishing and Amazing Tales and all that kind of stuff. But when somebody cracks the cover and it's not what they're expecting, even as that generation of fans or readers dies off, I think branding is a big part of it too. But that ties into the economic stuff, like you said.
I think branding has become much more of a thing, particularly, and I think you're right, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, one of the biggest anthologies was Sword and Sorcery anthologies. Those were huge when I was younger. And that was their consistent marketing it was Sword and Sorcery, and it was geared towards being YA friendly so that they could be in the public libraries as well as school libraries. And so, and it was an interesting thing with that. And then, so yeah, I think that branding it, if you create your own anthology brand with it, maybe that helps. Like the Extraordinary Expanding Universe and the Planetary anthologies.
I've talked to Chris Rocchio when we had him on in the after show, who for a while organized for Bain their anthology collections. He mostly handled, as I understand, the reprints where they were doing it. And one of the things that when we first started doing anthologies, we just generically branded by subgenre and said, go, have fun. And that works to a point if you've got big names in the anthology. Like if you put a Larry Correa in it, his fans are going to buy it and you're going to make your money back. But if it doesn't have a big name like that, the billboard header, then you're sort of battling against the wind, so to speak. In which case, a central theme versus just a generic subgenre will get you farther because a theme could span several subgenres, but it's got that theme. So instead of just Space Fleet, like the one we've got coming out, it's Heroic Last Stands. Because it's got to be Space Fleet, but it could be so much more. And then you don't limit it by genre, you're limiting it by the story. And I think that's a better way. It makes it easier to market was what the people over at Bain, the advice they gave me after, I kept doing it. So I think there's something to be said about that. Since I wouldn't go away, they're like, well, you might as well do it right then.
And I think Laurel K. Hamilton did an anthology, and it was all centrally themed stories of hope. Fantastic Hope, I think was the name of it.
Fantastic Hope.
And then the Noir Fatale, those were anthologies that did very, very well. I worked for Barnes & Noble at the time, and they were on the bestseller tables. And because they had a theme that was open, but still encapsulated enough.
They also had huge names.
They did have a huge names. I was talking with Gary Poole one time, and Gary Poole has edited several of them, all of the Black Tide Rising anthologies and several other things for Bain. And Chris and Jamie are nodding their heads going, yes, Gary, the long hair, Gary. But, and he was saying that when he set out, he said it was somebody else's formula, and he just tried to copy it, which was like a third big names, a third B-listers on a third new. And if you look at the Black Tide Rising anthology, the first one, most of those what were new authors then have several books out now. So I guess it worked.
I will say the market for that is shifting. What's that, Terry?
I didn't say anything.
It was Jamie. No, Chris.
Oh, I thought
Chris.
It was the farm team. Is what,
yeah. Nobody heard that.
So one of the things I've noticed is there is not a discrepancy, but there's a distinction. Some of the indie authors that are putting out anthologies, they'll do limited run anthologies where it'll only be published for 6 months and then it's totally yeeted off the board. Sometimes they leave up the paperback, sometimes not. I actually see and I did that with our first one that we did, but looking back on for the amount of work you put into organizing that and paying for all the editing and the cover, like going forward, we plan to leave ours up because obviously rights revert and people can republish it, but when you pull yours down, that's like I don't know. It seems like going to the moon and then trying to wipe the footprints up. Like there's something to be said for leaving that out there and letting readers find it in their time instead of sort of that artificial 6 months constraint or whatever, you agree upon. And I have been surprised that, an anthology that we put out, I don't know, a year and a half ago, I'm still getting okay-ish sales day to day. I mean, it's random. But so I do wonder as the market shifts, whether getting away from that short run only model will help with that resurgence. Because if you can only get it 6 months, what if you missed the window and you just didn't have the money then? Well, then you're kind of hosed. Whereas if you don't unpublish.
Yeah. What do you think, Terry?
It makes it a little easier for them.
So
I've been in anthologies, both ones that are still out and ones that were short run. I personally think they should be allowed to leave them up. Even the ones that are long-term, even where it's stories that I get a percentage of, I'll get a percentage of the earnings for a year. And after that, it's all to the anthology. So I've made what money I'm going to make off of it in that year. What do I care if they make a little bit more after that? I hope they do. Maybe it'll make them make another anthology.
And that's one of the reasons we started doing our series of interviews with authors of short content, because I like short stories. I like writing them. I like reading them. So I'm trying to foster making them, give them a space where people can talk about them, because there's just not as a lot of them. And Cisca humors me when we do those. So
I don't humor you. I enjoy them.
All right.
You interviewed Mel Todd over Noodle Day, which is one of my, hands down, one of my favorite stories I've read in a while.
And I'm going to say it very slowly because it's a tongue twister. Summer Solstice Shenanigans Anthology. Yeah, I will not say that one fast, but that's the one that they've got out about urban fantasy. And I will say that, when you just interviewing them and listen to authors talk, like you hear about genres I might not have probably read urban fantasy on my own, but listening to them talk, I'm like, dude, that actually sounds kind of cool. So I think the exposure that you get with, what's that?
I'd make you read it, but I'm bossy.
You are, but it's okay. All right. So we've talked about sort of the marketing and the business side of it, but as a general rule, do you see value in the storytelling medium of short content, which is basically anything sub-novel?
Sure.
Terry?
Well, why don't we define what a novel is then?
I think SIFWA says that a novel is 40,000 words plus.
So can you give people like me who have no idea what that means in page, like what a rough page count would that be?
About 250 words a page.
It could be anywhere from 250 to 400 words.
That's a lot of math on the fly.
Yeah.
JR should be used to this.
Right,
He'll come up and he'll be like, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but how many pages is that? He should be used to it after all these.
It's like a thin paperback book. That's the size. Thin paperback.
There you go.
So Amazon's with Kindle, and that's pretty standard with e formats. So digitally, 250 words roughly is a page. So a short story is about 30 to 40 pages roughly.
Okay.
So I looked it up. I've got the SIFWA short story list definition, and a short story is up to 7,500 words. A novelette is 7,500 to 17,500. More than that, up to 40,000 is a novelette, or excuse me, is a novella, and then 40,000 onward is a novel. I think for most modern anthologies, they're roughly calling a short story 6,000 to 10,000 range.
Okay.
That's about right.
So it depends. But you obviously, if you're looking at a print copy, you're going to fit more words per page than you would digitally, because they scale for all, like, are they reading it on their telephone versus their Kindle versus their Nook versus, ad hominem number of electrical devices I know nothing about. And I think that's why you tend to see just a standard 250 words a page, because it makes sizing the code and sciencey stuff work. Yes, you did get me to list Nook. I know it's heresy. I'm sorry, Bezos. Forgive me. But what about what about you, Jamie or Chris? Do you guys see value, aside from just as a reader? Do you see value in short content?
Oh yeah. One, kind of like we were saying before, aside from as a reader getting to sample a bunch of different authors, as a writer, it's helpful to, use a short story to refine your craft and get your name out there and, just kind of get used to the whole business.
I think it's also good because I look at it as like that's the.
It's like dipping a toe in the water.
I think it's the thing that America contributed to writing. I mean, Russians do the novels, right? We do the short story, between Poe and Mark Twain and all that kind of stuff. Us and like the English, I think I love shorts. I love short fiction. I mean, because it really forces you got to be sparse and really good with your words. You can't waste anything. And that's, for someone like me, especially who loves to talk a lot, man, that's discipline. And it's good. It's good to force yourself into that. It's like batting practice.
Yeah, I will say it's also, if you're, for new authors that are getting started, everyone had asked me advice on how to get better. I say, well, your first round of professional editing will change you drastically because you learn things that you don't even, like your quirks, you don't even realize you have. Well, that's expensive when you're paying, roughly 2 cents a word and it's a 100,000 word novel. But a short story at 10,000 words is an affordable way to do not just an edit, but like a developmental edit where they tear your story apart from a structural and grammar. And so, if nothing else, it's just a learning exercise. It's an affordable way to get that masterclass, so to speak. So, all right. So we beat that horse to death. So do you think with the resurgence in the anthologies, with e-zines coming back and trying to, don't laugh, Doc, it's just not polite. Laughing at me like that. Do you think that there's going to be you would. Do you think there's going to be a resurgence in short content? I'm seeing more anthologies lately, hearing about them than I ever have before. You're getting a lot more, I think, traction with like the e-magazines. Or am I just seeing it because I'm interested in it? What do you think, Terry?
I think that I don't really know. When I said that I'm a novelist and I do some short stories, I'm not a voracious short story reader, so I don't pay attention to the market.
Fair enough. All right. What about you, Jamie, Chris?
Well, we have been seeing a lot more anthologies from, established universes. Like you see MHI, you see Four Horsemen, Freehold, and as the primary authors have built the world up, I don't know. Sometimes they need
Fresh voices.
yeah.
Fresh voices and the opportunity to just fill in pieces of the world for them. And that goes back to like back in the day with shared universes, like Thieves World was one back in the day. And if you ever read the Borderland Anthos series, which was all linked together and stuff like that, even like the way that the pulp writers used to do these round robins to build their short worlds, to build their worlds up through short content. H.P. Lovecraft did that. Robert E. Howard kind of did that. They were all buddies. And you're seeing some of that now with the Pulp Rev guys too. Like I love Kursova. That's a good magazine. And Story Hack's another one that's pulling. I think bringing back especially the sword and sorcery adventure style short stories too. And so it may not get huge, but there's definitely a market for it. There's a solid, steady selling niche that digs it.
Well,
And,
Eric Flint was one of the first people really. He actually took some of his short stories. People were making essentially fanfic instead in the 1632 universe. And then he actually started taking those and going, hey, can I publish, and publishing them as anthologies. So they were then becoming canon. And I thought that was an ingenious tool to do. And it was great, because if there's not accepted by the world creators, really, it's just kind of fan fiction. And so if you're going to write it and you can get yourself into an anthology set with that universe, now you're canon, not fan fiction. And that's much cooler.
And you're getting paid. Maybe a lot.
Potentially.
Yeah, you're getting paid and you're developing that writer resume. But to be honest, like, it's just really nice. I know a lot of authors who, Casey Ezel, Marissa Wolf, they'll gladly say they started with essentially fan fiction because the tools were there. So they really focused on their story craft versus their world building craft. And it really helped them just kind of tackle one of the two major aspects of writing at a time. So
with something like the Four Horsemen universe, it gives other authors a chance to explore the dark nooks and crannies of ideas and themes that might not get touched on in the regular novels. I just signed the contract for doing my 10th short story for a Four Horsemen universe anthology. And I have went places that Chris Kennedy and Mark Wandry wish I'd never gone.
That's when I travel.
Yeah.
Anti-gravity.
Antimatter.
Hey, there's been some good science articles about antimatter of late. And believe me, I tag Mark in every single one of them.
Good. I appreciate the spunk. Do you have anything to add to that, or are we ready to move on there, Jamie and Chris?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you think that that the market, and I know Terry doesn't really have much an opinion on this, so we'll skip him for this one. Do you think that there's a chance that that resurgence will allow them to become more fiscally viable, or will they forever be relegated to loss leaders and a way to get your name out there?
Oh, I think there's always a chance. And
The eternal optimist. I
yeah,
like it.
I really hope so.
I think tie-ins help with it too, because like JR, you brought up something really important when you said that game stuff, lore gets tied into video games and all that. So in a way, they kind of already are. I mean, that's if you think about it, how many game manuals do you have are like chock full of just short fiction, essentially, to build the game world up? So if you look at it from that perspective, yeah, I guess they kind of already are. Otherwise, I hope they do. I hope they get financially viable again. I mean, Lost Leader or Free Gimmies, that doesn't suck. It gets people attracted to what you're doing. That's awesome. But it'd be nice to see something kind of like turn into a breakout hit. From something like that. Like I said, I'm so new to writing that I look at everything as from a musician standpoint, because I used to play in a couple bands. So I keep making those sorts of allegories because they make sense to me. And I admit they're not perfect matches.
Close enough. I mean, it's still the creative IP idea. So I think one of the things that's hard to do, though, is the anthologies, because you're herding cats to get 10, 20, sometimes 30, 36 authors together for one collection. You end up with it takes time to produce, and then editing doesn't happen. Like, it's not an instant pivot. So the ability to do certain things like pop culture isn't as there, which makes it hard to make money at that. So for instance, when we did our Storming Area 51 anthology, if we had been there the firstest with the mostest, I think, we probably still could have made it. If it had been the Woodstock of our generation, like they had predicted, it'd still be selling. But, when you do anything that's tied to current events, I think you run that risk of, well, if I'm not fast enough and the tides turn a little bit. So I think if you're strategic, you can get things that still sell, but you just have to do a little bit more forward planning on what. Although I will say that's where small press publishing and indie publishing gives you a little bit of a leeway. I've listened to Chris Rocchio talk about the back end amount of time it took to produce something. And that there's just no way you can pivot on that if it's a year or two out that you're planning things.
Yeah.
Whereas, it takes me maybe 6 months to throw something together, and that includes editing. So I hopefully that ability to pivot will bring enough interest back. So, and I'll keep pestering Terry, and maybe he'll give me another short story where he kills me gloriously, because I want to be the Joe Buckley of my generation. That's my goal.
You got to die many more times before you're Joe Buckley sport.
Oh, well, we can help too.
I know he's only got like 100 million thousand. Well, if I make a clone army where I clone myself like a bazillion times and then kill them all in one nuke strike, does it count?
No.
We'll have to think about that one.
It's got to be the one and only.
You're supposed to be on my side, Terry. Terry, you're supposed to be on my side, not Joe's, right? Your team JR, not Joe.
Never on your side. Did you invite me thinking I was on your side?
One of these days,
not true.
Still muted.
I only came on today
right,
because
so
I said I wanted to tell you were wrong. You're wrong, JR.
See, this is why Terry likes me.
Okay, let's practice this. The Empire of Bones is the greatest space opera of all times. Now tell me I'm wrong. I'm waiting.
An author can't judge their own work. I let other people tell me how good they like my stuff or not.
Team Kelsey.
Ooh. Nah, Jared's the main character, but we'll move on. So let's dig into the nuts and bolts. So what do you think makes a good short story? You got any opinions on that, Terry, other than about how right I am?
Yeah,
sure. Death does make it very good.
I think what makes a good short story is having it not quite go the way the reader would expect. They start down one path, and then they're like, wait, where are we going with this story? The facts aren't quite lining up with what I expected, but they still get an entertaining outcome. If it's predictable, I don't think it's enjoyable. I think a little bit of unpredictableness in a short story is what I like.
What about you, Doc?
I think
you're a voracious reader.
I am a voracious reader. I think one of the big things about a short story that makes it work is the tropes can add a lot of context when used correctly. Particularly for some quick, don't rely on it, but for some quick world building, like super wham bam. Okay, alcoholic mom. Okay, now we know why this person's burying themselves into fandom, and in our story, Love Finds a Way. Okay, she's got a troubled home life, so because the home life wasn't the story was what happened when she went on the road trip. So, but it gave context to why she was going on the road trip. So sometimes using those tropes in the back to just kind of build some quick world building without a lot of word detail. But I do think that one of the most important things is being concise and picking those powerful words. Hovel instead of a shack. Something to paint that picture quickly and concisely helps a lot. So that's mine as a reader.
All right. That's a well thought out answer. It's almost like you've seen the questions in advance. What about you, Jamie? Chris?
Self-contained. I mean, a short work needs to be start, middle, finish, self-contained and stand on its own. And I think if it could do that and it doesn't just drop off suddenly, which is why I brought up the English Professor Crack before about how, let's do something experimental. Let's just have the story end here for no reason and nothing happens. Kind of crap they make you read in English classes. I'm like, that doesn't stick with people. If it does, it sticks with you because the story made you mad. You know what I mean? The author, did a bait and switch on you. Like you said, it should do something unexpected, like Terry said, but it shouldn't be bait and switch. It's got to be self-contained. It needs to be a complete work.
Well, I'm sorry, Jamie, you can go and we can circle back to me because I'm a talker.
Oh, that's okay. I was actually going to just copy your answer. No, I think a short story needs to be, if nothing else, just concise and get to the point and still be hard hitting.
Yeah. Well, two of my favorite novels of all time, which anybody who listens probably is going to go, yes, we know, is The Rowan by Anne McCaffrey and then Dragonflight by Anne McCaffrey. Both, particularly Dragonflight, was a pivotal novel in science fiction. Yes, science fiction, JR. Because I'm not going to fight with you when you're being stupid, JR. Pern is not a fantasy, it is a sci-fi. But both these novels, back on topic as we break chain, Chris, is both these novels started as short stories. They were actually published. I think Locust Magazine is what published Dragonflight the first time. But they blossomed more because of that concise world building. It had that build, that the beginning, middle, and end of a good story. But there was so much more, and so she was able to go back and flush it out. So,
you hit on something there, because there's still people today who say the original version of Ender's Game, which was in There Will Be War, the first one that Jerry Pournelle edited, is better than the full-length novel, the final version that came out in like 91. Yeah. So, there's a big back and forth about that. I've kind of gone on both sides of that. Where it's like,
okay.
Which one do I prefer?
Chris, closer to the mic, please. We love you. We want to hear your voice.
No, I'm sorry about that.
So,
no, did you hear that, what I said about Ender's Game?
Yeah, that the short story part was actually probably better edited, right? So, A Beautiful Friendship by David Weber is another example. It actually got published originally as a short story and an anthology, and then he made it into a full-length novel. So
it used to be, when there were long-standing magazines that had subscription-based services, like, I don't know, people joke about Reader's Digest, but that's an example. People would sell serialized short story universes. So one story followed the next. They were each self-contained. You could pick up that magazine and read that particular story, and it was done. But it tied to the one before it, and it links to the one that came after it. And so when rights returned, a lot of those authors did what they call braided novels, and they'd weave those stories back together. So we interviewed, when we were still Sci-Fi Shenanigans, Kristen Catherine Rush, and her Helldivers is Nicholas Smith or Sainsbury, but was it Space Divers? I think one of her divers universes was a braided novel for the first one. It was actually 3 novellas that she wove together. And so it was very common back in the day. You don't see the braided novel as much anymore because you're not seeing as much serialized short fiction. But it is a way to make it concise. And Jamie, Chris, you had mentioned the self-contained, and that is something, having been on both ends, or both as a writer, as a publisher, and as a reader. When people approach a short story like it's just the first 3 chapters of their novel to get you hooked, and then they just leave you hanging, that pisses you off more than anything. Like, no, you got to tell an independent story. Like, you can change it later and make it the first 3 chapters, but it better in the beginning stand alone. And I think that's where it's too easy to say, well, let me just give you the first couple chapters of this book, so you want to go read the rest of the book, but you end up angering the readers, and then I don't know that they'll follow through in a way that's positive for you.
One of the things I like also on it, and this is actually a time when I wish the author had done short stories it's a little outside the genre. I did not read the book, but my friend was trying to explain to me all the different stuff. 50 Shades of Grey.
Whatever, we know you read it.
It's okay. I've read weirder stuff. But so she wrote the novels, and then she's been going back and essentially rewriting the novels from the other guys, from the male's perspective. I'd much rather, I have no interest in those novels. Just give me like short stories of it, because you already know everything, if that makes any sense. And Alona Andrews did on for a while on her website as free content. And I think she actually did one in a short story where it was the male character's perspective of the same moment. And so, or of some of the same moments as her main character, Kate Daniels, which was great because you already know everything. So there's no need for this world building of how did he get there? You know, he's there, you know? And
One of the things, sorry.
No, what?
One of the things you said earlier, JR, is I think you said Chris and Catherine. It's actually Christine Catherine Rush, and the novel was Diving the Wreck.
Oh.
Okay. I must have glitched because I thought I said her name right, but it's also possible I messed up. And if so, I will blame Cisca, and you can send the hate mail to Doc Cisca at Blasters and Blades Podcast.
I just wanted to
we'll
clarify
totally answer
that
email
one.
because it's real. Okay.
You know,
She's a great short story writer. I've read a number of her short stories as well, and she's one to go to when you're looking for that type of quality. She writes good stuff.
I think her and her husband write a short story before they've even had breakfast every day. They're pretty prolific, the two of them.
They've been
Wesley
writing
Smith
for
is your husband
almost 40 years, so they've got quite the backlog of stories lurking around.
That does
Talking
help.
short stories. I'm going to go ahead and interrupt you here, JR, and say you want to talk short stories. Her husband, Dean Wesley Smith, publishes his own monthly magazine called Smith Stories with novels and short fiction that he writes himself.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot of writing. One day I will be that grown up and write that fast. That's prolific.
I will never be that grown up. I can't write that fast.
You know what? I would say as a reader,
I can't either.
As a reader and somebody who buys a lot of books. So as a reader and a consumer, because I very rarely, I love my library. I do support my local library. I used to be through library fees because of not returning the books on time until I decided it was just cheaper to buy the books. I am bad at returning books.
Something to keep in mind when he says that he publishes novels and whatnot. He came up as a writer at the point where novels were much shorter. So he really does live with the 40, 50,000 words as being a novel. So it's not necessarily the doorstops we're seeing these days.
Yeah, but I was going to say is I'd rather have the quality writing versus pumping them out, so to speak. If that makes sense.
I don't think speed and quality necessarily can't intersect.
They can.
They can. Basis.
Jody Lynn can, if you need. She used to say that she could write a short story in 72 hours or less. She can do it. She's fabulous. Not everybody can do it though.
I actually find short stories harder to write because, like Chris said earlier, you've got to be more succinct with your words, and I tend to be very verbose. I see nothing wrong with the Tolkien manner of describing every blade of grass. I know. I mean, it's hard to believe, but it's true. So, like for me, the short content sort of forces me to think, more succinctly, and that takes longer for me to write than if I was just writing the same amount of words in chapter form for something longer. But all right. So speaking of writing and reading short fiction, do you think for it to work that short content has to be limited to one POV given the length restrictions, or can it work for more than one perspective? And we'll go to you first, Jamie, this time.
I think it can work from more than one perspective, but you have to be very, very careful about it. And I certainly wouldn't do more than two, just because you don't have the space to really explore those characters that in depth.
Well, in Promise of Man, you do it once in the whole story.
I do one POV shift the entire story.
And that's just make the ending do this to you.
Yeah. but it has to be
That works. What about
very
you?
purposeful.
Fair enough, and I think that goes back with the word choice when it comes to short fiction. You also have to be more deliberate with your story plotting because you're more condensed, so it needs to be a tighter look, I think. But what about you, Chris?
I think you can, but I think the rule of two, if you want to call it that, here is probably smart. For the Defiant story that Doc and I wrote, it is two POVs as you flip flopping back and forth between, but it's also about almost 20,000 words. So we had a little bit more space to play with that. Yeah, we couldn't have done more than just the two POVs. I think it just would have turned into a hot mess. You know what I mean? So I think two is doable in a short work.
What about you, Terry?
I have written multiple points of view inside of a short story, but the two plot lines were very tightly interwoven, and the two events were meant to come together very quickly, and the events in one side of the plot depended on what the character in the other part did. So it was an incredibly tight weaving of timing and pacing to make that work.
Like a Guy Ritchie movie or a Quentin Tarantino movie. See, that's somebody who could do that. You know, even with a short film. And something I read once said that the reason why Philip K. Dick's stories keep getting made into movies is those middle length works, novellas and short novels, novelettes, are perfect for turning into a 90-minute, 2-hour film. Whereas like regular novels, like that's a mini series or that's a multi-part film series to do.
Brokeback Mountain. When I was at Barnes and Noble, I had to shelve it, and it was thinner than this book. It was like stupid thin, and I went, "Really? This is a novel? Like we're shutting this in the novel section?" But I was at first. It was very funny because that was the first time I realized that Brokeback Mountain was written based off of a piece of literature, and because I was like, wouldn't the book be thicker if it was based off the movie? They went, no, it went in reverse. Oh, okay. So, yeah, JR, mentioned it to JR, and he goes, I'm not bringing that topic up.
Nope. So I think you can do it. The one way I've seen short fiction work with multiple POVs is when it's told in, I'm going to probably butcher this because I've only seen it in writing, but epistolary, where it's told in letters looking backwards, because then you can get the multiple POVs because the central theme is whatever the current events are, and that story is pushed forward by the tales from the past. So like I did that with one of my Four Horsemen short stories that got made the Hugo reading list. It was the final sort of goodbye ceremony. It's called Casper's Widow, but it was the letters that they had left, you know, if I die, read this kind of thing being read aloud. And so while it was multiple POVs, the central POV was the here and now. And I think anything more than that, you're going to have a lot of problems trying to get that to work. And that's one of those shticks that if you do it over and over again, it stops having the impact. I think you can get away with that once or twice in your writing career. And then more than that, it starts to be, okay, yeah, we get it kind of thing. But what do you think about that one, Doc? Since you approach it as a reader, do you think it can work with multiple points of view?
I think that you have to be super concise and almost make it a case of like vignette moments, where it's just like ever so briefly. I think I actually read the short story that Terry is talking about where he did the multiple ones, and that was one of the very few times where I saw it and I saw it work. So
thank you.
All right. Well, Terry, did you want to weigh anything more? I'm not sure if I managed to ask you or not. I don't want to be rude.
No, I'm good.
At least not publicly. All right. So, you know, we've talked a little bit about what makes a good, in our opinion, obviously, and your mileage may vary. And if you disagree with us, feel free to join the discussion in the comments on the Facebook group or, you know, wherever. But do you think in order for a short content story to be well executed, that it has to be part of a larger series like what the Four Horsemen did? Or do you think it works as one-off without being tied to larger universes? Terry, you want to go?
No, it doesn't have to be tied to a larger universe to be a successful short story. It just has to be a good story. Finding an audience might be easier when you're publishing something in an anthology that's part of a larger readership, but that's not a reflection on how good the story is.
Okay, I can buy that. What about you, Chris?
I've read so much old stuff that honestly none of it was ever meant with being either interconnected or part of something bigger in mind. So yeah, I think if it stands alone, it stands alone. It's a great story. It's cool if it's tied into something bigger, or even if it's like tangentially or loosely tied into something, because then it comes kind of like an Easter egg, for the bigger, longer works, and that's always fun. But I don't think it has to.
So, Jamie, this is where you get to prove that you really are married by disagreeing with him. Can you do it? Can you pull it off?
Well, no, I don't think a story has to be tied into a larger universe. I think doing so is advantageous to the author because they don't have to spend that time building the world. They just get to tell their story. They don't have to create the background. They can just reference something in the larger universe and go on with the story.
Fair enough. I think a well-executed short story inevitably makes you want to know more about the universe. And so I've gotten some of my standalone short stories where like, well, where's the rest of this universe? I think I thought about that as a reader. Every time I really liked a short story, I'm like, man, I want more. So I think it can lead to that, but I don't think it has to. Coming at it
Right.
from a reader, what do you think, Doc?
I think some of the best short stories I've ever read were freestanding short stories. The Menace from Earth by Robert A. Heinlein is a great example of that. However, I do think if you're looking at it from a sheer profitability standpoint, it is much easier to market it if it's connected to a shared a universe that's already standing on its own 2 feet. But the number of short stories that have stemmed that or propagated truly fantastic universes is so impressive that I think that even if short story fiction is only a loss leader, it is a loss leader well worth having, because we'd be without the Tower of the Hive saga. We'd be without the Tamsin Silver's Billy the Kid stuff, which I can't remember what she ended up calling the series. You'd be without so many great things that Pern, and I mean, I would never want to forgo those works, and they all stemmed out of short stories. So I think short stories are a valuable and necessary part of the literature field.
So what is everyone's thoughts on anthologies where all of the stories link into a larger narrative to form a more cohesive tale? So I know, for example, Nathan Heisted did this with his Through the Wormhole series, where each story linked together into a larger story. I know Michael Z. Williamson did it with one of his Freehold Universe anthologies, where each short story told and basically created a novel. The universe already existed, but even within the scope of the book itself, it told a cohesive story. So what are your thoughts on that style of storytelling? This is just you as a reader, obviously, because it's not as common, but I do think it's enjoyable to read. So what about you, Terry?
I wouldn't want to be the editor on something like that. It sounds like it would be really fun to read, but oh my gosh, trying to herd those cats, I would not want to be part of that. It sounds like an interesting technique, but it's also one that has the potential for a reader to go really badly if the stories don't mesh really well.
Yeah. Pujol did one with one of her Miles books, and it was 3 or 4 short stories, and she had almost a unifying story within it, because the story was, if you've read the Miles Verkostigan books, well, if you haven't read them, he's bedridden, as one happens to do when they get blown up and stuff. And because it's a mill sci-fi book. And the intelligence operative comes in and goes, okay, so I I need you to debrief me on these incidences. And the short stories in the novel are the short stories of those incidences. So I think that was a time, but yeah, you really have to be super careful about how it works. And then, the founder effect. Jamie just put it in there. The founder effect panel at LibertyCon is a great example where it's all interwoven, and I'm impressed that they did it. It's very well done. But I'll let Jamie and Chris talk.
Yeah, Resistance. I got to tell you, that's something else. I mean, just because, and it really came down to, you mentioned you wouldn't want to. Terry mentioned you wouldn't want to edit it. Yeah, Mike and Jamie Ibsen.
Yeah, they've said many times they don't ever want to do that again.
And I think the effect was, I think collectively we pulled off something pretty damn good, to be honest. But I think this was more common back in the day. I mentioned Thieves World before. I mentioned Borderland. I think people used to try it more often, but it was also, you notice those anthos, it's a much smaller group of writers. That's like only like 4 or 5 writers at most. So that might be a little bit easier to do logistically than like a whole crowd of 13, 14, whatever the heck it was.
Wait, are you saying 2 veterans may have dived in head first and hit their head on the bottom of the pool while they were at it?
No. That doesn't.
Like that happens. I mean, we might have gotten this.
I got to tell you, I mean,
we might have gotten the Storming Area 51 anthology that way. Whiskey, yeah, that too.
So that's the thing, is I think you can do it, but I think it's more work in the. I think the work of editing, cutting it together, sequencing it alone, arranging it, if you want to use a music term. I bet you that's more work than the writing. So there was
almost positive.
Yeah. I mean, I remember one from back in the day, one of the Shadowrun anthos, when that game was the hotness, and it was kind of done the same way. And it's all I could think of was, wow, this must have been hard to pull off. Because when you do it well, like I said, it comes off like a good Quentin Tarantino movie or a good Guy Ritchie movie. It all flows together, And if you could pull it off, it's a heck of a move. But that's a lot more work, I think, after the fact than it is just the writing. At least what Mike had us do, for writing all those vignettes, because it was to try and build glue and connective tissue. So between his stuff, ours, and then Jessica Slanker's, and the way he just arranged everything, him and Jamie, to pull it off, I was like, wow, I would not want to do that. I mean, that's
Jamie Ibsen.
Yeah.
Michael Anderley
as a reader.
Michael Anderley did a couple of anthologies called Bob's Bar, and it had the stories were even more tightly interwoven than usual. It actually had the narrative of the short stories being interrupted by the other characters from the other short stories giving their views on what was going on. And it was difficult to write, but I can't imagine how tough that was to edit.
You know what, though? That sounds cool, though. I want to check that out now, because if you could pull that off well, that is a hell of a cool move.
Yeah, I read the 2 that I mentioned. The Wormhole was 4 anthologies that were tied. Each one told a cohesive story throughout. So it's essentially 4 novels written by like a bunch of people. And I've talked to Nathan about that when he put those together. He's like, yeah, there's a reason we stopped at 4. Because the return on investment, just for the sheer amount of time on the production end and the writing end to make it all line up, was just insane. But reading a well put together one, I think, was a lot of fun. But that's almost got to be a passion project, because I imagine it'll give everybody gray hair trying to do that. So speaking of short content, and I know this has come up before in Terry's podcast, but I know the Amazon is about to release their Vela program, which is short stories, serialized fiction, similar to their Kindle Unlimited program. But it's along the veins of what's been working in the Eastern markets with some of their programs. I think Radish is that right, Terry? Was it Radish that was the
Radish
program
is
they were
another
using?
Site. Something Road. I can't remember the name. But yeah, there's a couple of sites that do serialized fiction, and I came on the show mainly to tell you you're wrong about Vela. So I'll just put that out front right now. Whatever you're about to say about it, you're wrong. And it's Royal Road.
All I was going to ask was I was going to posit the question whether that style brings a resurgence of more widespread interest in short serialized and short fiction in general, or whether it'll be a flop for the readers used to binging insufferably long series.
First up, serialized fiction is not short fiction. And I know I've told you that before, but it's unless you've actually listened to serialized fiction, it's hard to grasp, like the old radio serials. Serialized fiction is more of a delivery method than a way of breaking down the increments. It's just taking a longer story and presenting it in smaller chunks to you that draw you from one piece to the next. It's still a longer story. It's not a short story.
Thank you.
Don't you hush.
We can have
Doesn't
Terry
every
on all the
individual
time.
segment
He agrees with me a lot.
She sends me a talking points thing to agree with her.
Oh, I figured she would do that. So doesn't every individual segment though have to stand alone a little bit, much like a short story would?
No, it does not. The serial that I am writing for it is in a different genre than I normally write. It's a project of love. And I started writing serialized fiction when I was learning how to write. And I wrote 4 novels as serialized fiction and published them under a pseudonym on another site to gain experience and get feedback. And they do not have to be standalone. The key increment with serialized fiction is it can only be a scene or a part of a scene. You have to have that hook at the end that says, I need to turn the page and find out what happens next. And that's one of the key aspects of serialized fiction that's even more important in serialized fiction than in novel writing, because there's a time increment between your sets.
So here's a question on serialized fiction. And I would love to get like you, John Hartness, and Alona Andrews all on a podcast talking about serialized fiction. Because I think it's really neat. But she was the first experience I had with serialized fiction on her website. She does the Innkeeper's Chronicles. And she would put up, and it was on her website, it was a service to the fans type thing, labor of love. And they would put up maybe about a half a chapter at a time. They tried to do it weekly. Sometimes they would post. Things have gotten busy. Hopefully it'll be less busy and we'll get it to you next week. But they were almost, in this case though, they were like almost unedited or lightly edited. And which they did afterwards was they pulled them down after about a couple months after they finished. And they told fans, we're pulling it down on this date. They'd pull it down, they'd edit it all, and then they'd put it out as a book. Are you going to end up doing that with your serialized fiction when you finish a storyline? Okay. I
absolutely am. But the serial that I'm doing is what I'm going to call an endless serial. It's one of those like the Russian lit RPG serials that I'm listening to one on Audible right now. It's in chapter 700 and the story is still going. I have extremely long views of what's going to happen with the character in my serial, and the world and the plot will support a really long effort. But I'm going to have major story arcs that are going to be roughly novel length because I'm a novelist and that's how I think. And as I hit a novel, I will go ahead and prune that part out and it will come out as a novel. They've updated the Vela terms and services so that 30 days after the last episode of a book that you want to call out, you can do that and still leave it up as a serial.
Nice.
So absolutely, I'm going to do that.
Okay, so we will have to potentially have another fireside chat on serialized fiction. I do know when I think serialized fiction, I know Joe Vasicek, and it was a question later, but he wrote the Star Wanderer series, which was a serialized set of novellas. So they were all like 25,000 words each that they would publish back when speed over size mattered with Amazon and Kindle Unlimited. And it's kind of personal for me because that I credit that with keeping me alive when things were at their worst after Iraq. Like that bought me another day because, well, I don't know what happened yet, right? So for me, it's kind of personal, which is why we do this. But so for me, I associate the serialized with a definitely contained story. But so it's definitely something we'll dive into deeper, I think, with a future episode, and we'd love to have you back.
I do want to add one thing. Sure, I do want to add one other thing. Is I do that. I've been continuing to do serialized versions of what I do novel-wise with my Patreon page. The patrons on the page, they get my chapters in roughly first draft format as I do them. And so it's still my way of driving myself to write because I can't leave that audience hanging for me. I've got to put something there for them.
Okay. Do you have, I know you haven't done a lot of serialized fiction, Jamie and Chris. Is that something you want to weigh in as readers, or you ready? We want to move on? You're muted.
No, I like it. I mean, it's isn't that how Stephen King did the Green Mile originally? Something like that.
I think so.
Yeah, I think, and I know, like back in the day, Charles Dickens and Alexander Dumas used to do that too. I mean, that's part of the reason why I think the Count of Monte Cristo was so friggin' long to begin with. But I think there's a place for it. I don't know if I'm going to get there. Right now I like doing short stuff, especially because just given the day job's constraints, I could do shorts, pretty self-contained, even if it takes a little longer than what's been asked for. It works, especially like if you're somebody who is kind of, with a day job and other obligations, then the shorts are kind of the way to go still. Serialized, yeah, I'd like to. I don't know about anything I've got in my cranium right now that would really lend itself to that, but we'll see. Willing to give it a shot.
All right. So what about you, Jamie?
I have nothing to add to that conversation.
All right. So we'll move on, and you can tell us what your favorite short story is.
That's I guess I grew up loving the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. That was probably my favorite story growing up.
Ooh.
So. I was a very strange child.
But there's nothing strange with that story. What about you, Chris? You got a favorite?
I do actually. My favorite short work is Who Goes There? Hands down. I mean, it's just so well done. That it's creepy and scary still reading it today, even though you've seen the thing God knows how many times, right? It still gets you, and that's what I dig about it. Second favorite would probably be The Man Whom the Tree Loved, which was an Algernon Blackwood story. Really weird as shit. Like I said, the early 20th century, these dudes were weird. All right, I mean, they could get away with stuff in storytelling when nobody knew what a genre was. And it just sticks with you, man. That story scared the crap out of me for like a week. So, I think, we didn't touch on horror necessarily with this, but man, horror works so well in short fiction. It's not even funny. So that could be a little springboard for a follow-on to this, because I really think that's a genre that lends itself well to shorter formats.
I think you're right. I think in part because the thing that's typically the scariest about horror is the fact that it's unexplained. And in shorts, you don't explain a lot.
That works. Do you have a favorite, Doc?
The Menace from Earth by Robert A. Heinlein. So,
and what about you, Terry? I know you don't read a lot of it.
I actually read very little short fiction, so I don't have a favorite.
So just say something by me. It's cool. We'll move on.
Nothing by J.R. Handley is my favorite work.
J.R., that's the title of your next short story.
It should.
That could be an entire anthem short story by Terry Mixon. Is how much I hate J.R. Handley. 10 stories about.
I should write the collected works of how many times I've killed J.R. Handley.
I'd buy it.
You should. It would be glorious. I'd buy it. So, all right. So I think I have a couple. So I really liked John De La Rose. He wrote a good short story in the Four Horsemen universe. Couple? A Fistful of Credits called Lost and Found. Yeah, I have a couple short stories that I really dig. Lost and Found by John De La Rose was really good. It was sort of space opera at its most classic, where it was the unknown and they were being hunted by a predator and they didn't really know what was going on, and it was sort of had vibes of like landing in the middle of some sort of Mayan ritual, but it was on an alien planet and you had blaster rifles and whatnot. There was a short story that's not in print anymore by Chris Winder, where he had a funny take about heaven as a coffee shop. Full disclosure, I liked partly because he killed me in it in a hilarious way, and I won't spoil it because I understand he's going to put that back up. But I've never laughed so hard as when I read that short story, just his take on what the afterlife might look like. And then some weirdo named Terry Mixon, you might have heard of him, wrote a story, I think it was Warfish, that was sort of taking a World War II submarine battle and putting it in space. I recommend that to everyone. And then unfortunately, he pulled it from print because he's not a nice guy. But that was a really good one.
I hear it might be
and then I mentioned
republished
Joe
soon.
Vasicek because that's excellent news because I like to recommend that to people. Is it long enough? I don't remember how long it was that you could do a paper copy, or is it too short for that?
It's too short for that. It's really a short story. But the person you referred me to showed an interest in picking it up.
Yeah, good. So, and then, like I said, the Star Wanderer series, which was the one by Joe Vasicek, which was sort of serialized novellas that I mentioned earlier. Those were some that I remember, and I've read so much that I'm sure there are others that I'll think about later, but that's the way of the world. So speaking of short content, what about stuff you've written? What is your favorite short story that you've written, Terry?
It has to be Warfish. It's the first short story that I ever wrote, and it was inspired by a novel called Warfish, written by a World War II submariner. And so I said, how can I take World War II submarines in the story that I loved growing up and tell it in a space setting? So I love it.
Okay. What about you, Doc? Because you've got one short story published. Is that your favorite?
Yeah, of course it is.
So we wrote together a short story called Love Finds a Way for the Area 51. And I know nothing about fandom. So I ended up bugging her so much and she had so much involvement. I'm like, man, I got to give her title credit because she made enough changes to it. So that was one we did together for that anthology.
It was a lot of fun.
Which surprisingly, we get enough. It was, and we get a lot of people asking when we're going to tell the rest of that story. So that's always a good sign for short content. What about you, Chris? What's your favorite short story that you wrote?
I've got one, God Spares, coming out later this year that it's very personal. And it's a Christmas themed one, but it's also military and sort of urban fantasy and a little bit of sci-fi. I don't even know what the heck it is. Like, I don't think it's going to sell a single copy, but it's actually my favorite thing that I've written so far. Other than that, it would be the aviator math vignette from Resistance, that one little piece, because a lot of people really seem to dig it, and it was the most fun one to write in that one, because that is about 70% truth, that one. Like, no kidding, there I was, double truth.
Right. Nice. So, hold on, Terry. Hold that up for a second. I'm going to put you solo so people can see it.
I'm going to go check
35 cents. It's an old book.
I'll have to check that out. I wonder if that's available as a reprint.
I wouldn't be surprised, but it's a great book.
So, what about you, Jamie? What's your favorite that you've written? Because I know you've written a couple.
I think Province of Man is actually my favorite. It's not an easy read. It does deal with some uncomfortable issues, especially within the military, but really any leadership organization. And it's, I guess I didn't realize how dark it actually was as I was writing it. But
that is spoken like a vet. I didn't realize how dark and fucked up this was until somebody looked at me weird about it.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even think about that, but yes, everyone on the panel today is a veteran.
My first feedback about it from Mike when I sent it in was, damn, that's dark. So I guess when Mike Williamson says that,
the guy that wrote Soft Casualty is telling her the story's dark.
But,
yeah.
But you know what? It is my first one that I've done on my own with lots of research help from Chris. So I'm proud of it. I'm proud of how it turned out.
I'll put a plug in for the one you guys got coming up. JR, you and Jamie. I think you guys, I'll do my, oh, isn't that cute? You guys do write well together. And I can't wait to see Mother's Love hit the streets, because it blew me away the way you guys pulled that off.
That anthology is with the editor and proofreader and all that now. That was a lot of fun. That was tied for my favorite that I've written, both because we made the editing people that looked at it before we submitted it cry up a little bit, and our lack of Air Force understanding, because Jamie and I both Army and Chris was Air Force. We gave him the Forrest Whitaker eye about some of our Air Force terminology, and when she told me that, I was laughing so hard. It was glorious. But and then my other favorite was the one that I mentioned that I got the Hugo reading list for, was the Casper's Widow, which was the epistolatory tale. Mostly because I read the first couple books in the Four Horsemen universe, and I felt like there were no stakes. Go here, shoot this, do this, get paid, you're done. And there was no consequences for the shooting, the killing, the dying. I think that's everybody, who's reading it, if you've still read it, they addressed that going forward. But at the time I wrote the story, that hadn't been in the plot line, because Chris Kennedy and Mark Wandry are very disciplined about their writing style. So they could tell you probably 20 books out what's coming. And so they definitely had an arc for it. But as a reader, when you're getting the submission for that, that's all you have to go on is what's published. So that's why I wrote that. I felt like there needed to show that, it matters when bad stuff happens. So I told it from the widow's perspective. So that was, I wouldn't say it was fun to write, but it's definitely moving. So, all right. Well, we will move on to something happier, hopefully. No, we'll skip that one. We've already asked that one. So as short fiction, we talked about movies a little bit. A lot of Philip K. Dicks were made into movies. The Man in the High Castle was the one that comes to mind. Same title of the short story. But do you have a favorite conversion?
Do androids
dream
of electric sheep?
That's Blade Runner, right?
Yes, Blade Runner.
Okay.
There, got
right. What about you, Doc?
Reference.
Woohoo! What about you, Doc? Do you have a favorite short story that was made into a movie?
I really like The Hunt for Red October, but it wasn't a short story, but it was made into a movie.
Yeah, that's like the opposite of a short story.
Sorry.
Tom Clancy does not do short stories.
Tom Clancy's right. He does a Brandon Sanderson version of a short story.
No, David Weber.
Or maybe the other way around, since he was first.
I'm not really sure that there's any that.
Well, while you think about that,
a couple of my favorite short stories have got an option for movies, but nothing ever came of it.
All right, fair enough. What about you, Jamie?
The Mask of Zorro.
Oh, okay. All right. And Chris?
I already mentioned Who Goes There, because that became the thing. And I've seen both versions of it, the one from the 50s and the one John Carpenter did. And, my dad had a bad habit of watching scary movies when I was small and not telling me what he was watching, but, telling me to come over and sit and watch with him. I'm still kind of dealing with the trauma from that. And the worst part is I never figured it out.
My dad did the same thing.
So between Alien,
that explains so much about
Nightmare
you
on Elm Street, I never figured it out. I was a dumb kid.
No. My dad actually just scared me at the horror points. So I have a fear reaction that often results in laughter to this day.
No, but the thing is, actually, I've made reference to it a couple times in some of the stuff that I'm working on, which, like I said, is getting finished up and getting it through the ringers to get out there in the world. But I put my homages in there because you just got it. I mean, so yeah, that's my favorite adaptation is Who Goes There into the Thing, especially the John Carpenter version.
Fair enough. So mine was, I also like Do Androids Dream, the Blade Runner conversion. But also another one by Philip K. Dick that I really dug was We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, which became Arnold Schwarzenegger's Total Recall, which was a glorious movie. And I definitely wanted more. And when I went looking, I was...
What?
What's that?
And the second Total Recall movie, which no one should ever watch.
Wait, there's a second one?
It's terrible.
I didn't know there was a second one. Okay.
It's awful.
Well, I don't mind cringe. I might have to check it out just because.
It's got great music.
All right.
I'll give it that.
He reads my text messages.
I'm surprised.
Okay.
Usually it's my video that fails.
That's because you live out in the middle of nowhere and you've got like 2 tin cans for internet.
They're putting fiber in my network in my neighborhood, so I might upgrade to fiber soon.
That's always a plus.
Yeah,
so of all of your short stories that you've written to, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just making funny faces now.
Oh, of all of the short fiction that you've written, do you think you have one that you think would be the easiest for you to convert if it became a movie?
To a movie. I'm sure that plenty of them could be converted to movies because I tend to write very close stories. I don't write short stories that are these wide epics of lots of different things happening. So I personally think that any of them could be converted. I'm not going to pick one favorite.
I think the one where Kelsey's in the cabin in the woods.
Imperial Retreat. Yeah.
Yes. That would make an awesome killer shorts movie.
I like that killer because she goes and kills the assassin. That's very good.
I know. I was laughing a lot. I was enjoying it a lot.
All right, we got a little bit of an echo. So Jamie and Chris, we asked if of all the short fiction you've written, which do you think would make a good movie?
I don't know if Province of Man would make a good movie. But it's probably the only one that could be made into a movie.
That should be an episode of Tales from the Crypt, Tales from the Dark Side.
Yeah.
That should be.
What about you?
The nameless project that will probably be coming out soon sometimes. Which really wouldn't make a good movie, would make a great play.
Yeah.
Well, then we will have to have him back when that comes out to do a short interview about that short story, and he can share it in the group. And I think for mine, I think the most like moving movie I think would be the Casper's Widow because it was such a tight focus. Probably the easiest would be my short story Ishtar's Rising, which was merging my experience in Iraq with sci-fi, which was out. So as we wrap this up, because it's the last question, Terry, what are you currently working on?
As far as short fiction?
Can you pick them up and bring them in here?
Just in general, just we're wrapping this up. So
I'm working on
what are you working on for your
RPG
readers?
serial called Upstart Gods, and I am editing book 14 in the Empire series, Gunboat Diplomacy.
I love that title. So Doc, after your first short story, are you inspired to write more content? Yeah, this is true. You do need to sleep sometimes. Maybe I hear that's good for you. What about you, Chris? What are you working on right now that you can talk about?
The full-length novel, actually, and the other short stories is done. I am doing a nonfiction article, book chapter on space warfare that I just got to get over the finish line and turn that in. There's another couple nonfiction articles I'm working on, too. So most of the short stuff I'm going to be doing over the next year is going to be nonfiction. But there's a lot in the hopper that I'm going to get back to as soon as that's all done.
Okay. All right. And what about you, Jamie? Before your Wi-Fi dies again.
I'm actually working with you and about the was it Humanity's first Fashion and Light Travel? That's a fun novella. And
yep. The Mad Hatter.
Yep, Mad Hatter. And then the big Space Force novel.
That should be fun. I saw that, Terry, in the comments. That's not very nice. All right, and so I am we're working on together, Jamie and I, a novella probably called The Mad Hatter, which is first FTL encounter, and then it's in the universe of our Space Force series, which we're co-writing together. And then I'm also working on a military portal fantasy with James N. Ward about modern striker brigade going into Fantasy Egypt. So as we bring this to a close, before we lose you, Jamie and Chris, can you tell us how the listeners can find you?
Yeah, we both got Amazon author pages right now. That's the big thing. I've got accounts on Twitch and whatnot, but there's nothing there yet because we're just getting started. So Amazon's the place right now, and then as we get more stuff out that deserves a bigger presence, you'll see a bit more of us.
Yeah.
All right, and we'll link all of that they've got in the show notes, so you can find it, dear listener or viewer. What about you, Terry? Where can they find you on the wild interwebs? Besides your Chuck Tingle persona, where else can they find you?
Amazon.com. That's where you can find me.
All right, Terry Mixon on Amazon.com. You can find all of his books, and we will link all of it in the show notes to include his Patreon if you want early access to his content. And as usual, my contacts will be in the show notes, and you can find us on the podcast. You can find us on anchor.fm / blasters tack and tack blades, anchor.fm / blasters tack and tack blades. You can find us on Twitter at SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Send the hate mail to Cisca at blastersandbladespodcast.com. We have a Facebook group where we share all of the shenanigans, and all of our guests are invited to share their upcoming content with you, the listener and viewer. The Facebook group is facebook.com / blasters and blades podcast. You can support the show with a one-time donation at buymeacoffee.com / author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the show notes, or in the comment notes, that it's for the podcast, and I will make sure to keep Doc Cisca and Nick Garber duly intoxicated. They will drink until their liver surrenders. Or you can support us on a continuing basis over at Never Surrender. That's right. You can support us on a continual basis for as little as 99 cents a month at anchor.fm / blasters tack and tack blades. Bring us home, Doc.
Okay. See, I'm good. I was waiting nicely. So, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us, dear listeners. I hope you've enjoyed the wonderful show for the absentee overworked Nick Garber. Here, JR. I'm Cisca. This was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week. Same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, pineapple on pizza, teaching JR about science and how he's wrong, and all things that go boom.
That's heresy. I am not wrong, and pineapples do not belong on pizza, and that is the final word.